The Nigerian army is back on the offensive. Its target, Boko Haram. This time, it's determined to defeat the group that has taken control of large areas in the north of the country. Just how much of a danger is Boko Haram to Nigeria? And is military action the answer? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Nigeria's forces have launched an offensive against the radical armed group Boko Haram. They've deployed fighter jets, helicopter gunships and thousands of soldiers to take back territory the group seized in northeastern Nigeria. This week, President Goodluck Jonathan declared a state of emergency in 3 states. The offensive has been welcomed by many who've seen Boko Haram's violent campaign kill around 2,000 people since it began in 2009. But rights groups have called for restraint. They say they've documented cases of abuse by Nigerian forces in the past, including summary executions and random shootings. Let's bring in our guests now. In Abuja, Doyin Okupe, Senior Special Assistant to President Goodluck Jonathan on Public Affairs. In Santa Fe, Vicki Huddleston, former Ambassador to Mali and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for African Affairs. In London, Lucy Freeman, Deputy Director for Africa at Amnesty International and author of the report Nigeria Trapped in the Cycle of Violence. Let's start off with you, Mr. Doyin Okupe. If you can give us details about the offensive and how it's progressing.
Well, thank you very much. What we know presently is that immediately after the broadcast by Mr. President declaring the state of emergency, the Nigerian military forces and security agencies immediately rose to the occasion and deployment was immediately made. As you have enumerated, yes, it involved the entire army, the military, the air force, some members of the police force, and they are right now on ground. Actions, has been taken. There are locations where Boko Haram insurgents have converted to their enclave. Some forest in the northern part of Borno State, very near the border with Niger and Cameroon. We are aware that the military has already engaged the insurgents, and we are also informed that likely the military has taken control of those areas. We are also aware that in Adamawa State, a curfew, a dusk to dawn curfew, has been imposed. The intention of this is to ensure that the military, the civilian population are kept all out of the line of fire.
And the cutting off of phone lines?
Yeah, the cutting of the phone lines. The cutting of the phone lines is essential because in the past, it was obvious that the phone network, especially the mobile network, were the instruments that the insurgents were using to detonate bombs. That was the technology they were using. And, because the army is involved in house-to-house search and all that, it was important to dislocate this, this potential problem. It's all part of the state of emergency, and it's also very crucial to ensuring that the civilian population are not caught up in the line of fire.
Okay, we'll certainly talk about that a little bit more. Ms. Huddleston, what do you make of what's going on, the aim of the Nigerian military? Does it make sense to you?
Well, it makes sense. They're obviously responding to Boko Haram that has blown up the UN headquarters, that has taken hostages, killed them, and it's a very bloody movement. But as we know, the Nigerian government's military has not always had the best reputation. On the other hand, usually the army in Nigeria is more respectful of civilians than the police has been. I'm delighted to hear your guests say that they are going to respect the civilian population, that they're taking all necessary measures to protect the civilian population. This is extremely important The second thing that needs to be done, of course, and I know that the Nigerian government is well aware of this, is that the grievances of the North, of the Hausa and the Fulani people need to be addressed as well.
Okay, so Mr. Okupe, if I can just go back to you, and I haven't forgotten about you, Ms. Freeman, I will get to you in a minute. I mean, how do you make sure that civilians are not affected by this? Because so many of the Boko Haram live amongst these communities. They've melted into these communities, pretty much what we saw in Mali.
Well, as I was explaining to you, by imposition of dusk to dawn curfew, that ensures that, civilian populations are kept, behind doors, that they are kept behind closed doors. Now, it will only be troublemakers or those who want to confront the military that will dare to contravene such orders, and such people will be dealt with, summarily. Also, because everybody is in-house, it is easier for the military to conduct, based on intelligence report, their house-to-house search, and this way, it's only those who are affected or concerned that can ever be in any position of danger.
Okay, let me throw that to Ms. Freeman. I mean, it almost sounds too good to be true, doesn't it, Ms. Freeman, that this curfew is going to make sure that no civilians are affected. And is that possible, considering what you know about how the military has behaved in the past?
That's right. We have some very serious concerns about the human rights situation of the people living in northern Nigeria. And we should remember that there has been a curfew in place, for example, in Maiduguri, for a number of months, and the attacks are still ongoing. And unfortunately, human rights violations by the security forces have been ongoing. When I was in Maiduguri last year, and again a few weeks ago, we were seeing a civilian population that were terrified of the group, but also terrified of the security forces.
Why is
documented, well, we documented summary executions, unlawful detention, house burning by Nigeria's security forces, and this is the security forces that are mandated to protect the population are carrying out some very serious human rights violations. And I think what we have to remember with the state of emergency is this is not the first time there's been a state of emergency. There was a state of emergency for 6 months in 2012. And what we saw was that whether there's a state of emergency or not, the Nigerian military are going far beyond what's permitted in the law, whether that law is under the state of emergency or whether it's the law for the rest of the time.
Well, I'm sure you've got a question to ask Mr. Okupe. If you do, what would it be regarding this and the fighting that's happening at the moment?
Well, what we'd ask is that there is a very clear direction from the president, not just that there will be this protection of civilians or that the rules of engagement must be respected, but that there's a clear direction to the military that they must respect human rights and the rule of law at all times.
Mr. Okupe?
Well, I'm happy that the lady has also confirmed what we know, that the Nigerian authorities are very, very concerned and very concerned about the issue of human rights and ensuring that the civilian population are not overstretched or overstressed. It's, of course, it's a difficult situation because the Boko Haram insurgents they are not uniformed. They do not wear any uniform or any clear identities by which the forces can recognize them easily. So it's a difficult situation, and that is why they're employing these tactics of keeping people indoors and searching. And it, I believe that there's a renewed. I mean, the instruction that has been given is is clear and very easily understandable. The military officers, the superior authorities in Abuja are fully aware of the concern of Mr. President, and I'm sure that this has also been passed down to the commanders in the field. There may have been a couple of mishaps in the past, but I am very sure that this present campaign will be conducted in the best internationally acceptable standards.
Good, and we're going to hold you to that. Ms. Huddleston, I know that the US is very worried and that the US and Nigeria work very closely when it comes to security concerns. I know that the US has basically said that this could affect the US's ability to provide security assistance going forward if human rights abuses continue to be conducted by the military. What does that mean, and how much of an impact could that have on the fight underway at the moment?
Well, the Nigerian military receives limited assistance from the United States. I think what we really need here, and we should have learned this lesson in Mali, is that individual states are not very good at confronting these problems that are associated with Al-Qaeda. So what we need here is the African Union to be involved, and if not the African Union, the United Nations, so that there are observers on the ground, so that there is appropriate help to the Nigerian authorities, so that they can negotiate, and also so that their military campaign is a campaign against the militants, and it does not involve the civilians, or to the most limited degree possible. This is a regional problem. It needs a regional solution, and we need the African Union and the other African states, as well as the West, to get involved, to be involved in both the negotiations and in improving the Nigerian military's ability to respect human rights and carry out a professional campaign that's not going to result in causing more civilian casualties and pushing people to join this extremist movement.
Mr. Okupe, would you consider doing that? Would you consider bringing in the African Union, for example?
Well, you know, this is strictly a policy issue, and I am presently not under any instructions, or I have no information as regards whether the Nigerian authorities are considering this or not.
Okay, fine.
It's difficult for me to comment on that.
Let's flesh out a little bit about this group that we're talking about. Nigeria has been battling Boko Haram since 2009, though it's been around for a lot longer. Let's take a closer look at this group. Boko Haram, which means Western education is forbidden in the local Hausa language, was launched in 2002. But it wasn't until 2009 that it began attacking police stations and government buildings. The armed group rejects what it sees as Western influence in Nigeria, and it's been fighting to overthrow the government and establish an Islamic state in the north. It has bombed government targets, and its gunmen, often mounted on motorcycles, have assassinated policemen, Christian politicians, and almost anyone else who criticizes the group. But many Muslim civilians have also been killed in their attacks. Ms. Freeman, give us a sense more about Boko Haram and living under Boko Haram, what it's like and how they treat both Muslims and Christians.
It's a terrifying experience for the population who are having to live with these abuses by Boko Haram. We interviewed people whose loved ones had been killed, who themselves had been attacked. The group have burnt down schools. They've attacked so many schools that parents are too frightened to send their children to school anymore. I interviewed a teacher who said that whenever there's a loud noise in her classroom, the children, some of them just run out of the classroom and run home because they're too frightened and too traumatized to carry on schooling. And of course there have been a large number of attacks on churches and really some of the gravest human rights abuses that you can imagine. What's particularly worrying in all of this, and what's compounding the problem for the people, I mean, we've touched a little bit on the violations that they're experiencing from the military as well, but there's this lack of investigation, and there seems to be impunity for these attacks by the group. So most of the people that we spoke to who had suffered losses in their family, whose relatives had been killed or who themselves had been attacked, had very little, if any, investigation by the police into the attack, no compensation, no support from the state following the attack, and there's really a lack of support for victims of these attacks by Boko Haram.
Mr. Okupe, that's a good point there. Why is there so little support for the victims of Boko Haram? Why is there no compensation? I'm surely if you don't support those affected by Boko Haram, it's going to drive them away from the government too.
It's a major concern. It's a major concern for the administration and the government. But you must understand also that this is something that involves not just the federal government, it also involves the local authorities, that means the state governments and the local governments. I believe that consultation is taking place at the highest level as regards, this issue of, compensation for victims. And in fact, it's a very prominent part of the agenda of the committee that was set up by the federal and by Mr. President, to look into the possibility of dialogue and to assess the damage done, and also to bring recommendation on what to, how to compensate, civilians and citizens that have been badly hit by Boko Haram.
I know when you were having these conversations about compensation, excuse me jumping in here, you're also talking about granting amnesty to Boko Haram. I mean, clearly this has been rejected by Boko Haram. Could that work eventually?
Well, an amnesty has not been granted, but it's on the table. An amnesty has not been granted, it's on the table.
Correct.
What the government has fully authorized is the issue of dialogue. To open windows of dialogue with the insurgents so that, we can actually discuss with them, and those of them who are willing and prepared to lay down their arms can do that in peace. So even if peace has to be segmental, well, so be it.
I'm going to bring in Ms. Huddleston here. I mean, your work in Mali, and I know what your experience in Nigeria, what is it that's going to take away this problem? Because clearly there's an underlying problem to all of this that creates this state of militancy.
Yes. Northern Nigeria and southern Chad are very conservative Islamic areas and have been for centuries. And when the British controlled Nigeria, they allowed northern Nigeria and the Hausa Fulani people to continue with their emirs and with their very conservative Islamic approach. So we're talking about a region that has a desire for a conservative Islamic approach to life. So that has to be addressed. And as your Nigerian guest said, they're looking at ways to do this. General amnesty might work. The Algerian government tried that fairly successfully, because what you have to do is give the foot soldiers a chance to leave the movement and have a different kind of life. But what could happen in this situation, and which I find very, very worrisome, is that, yes, this is a local insurgency now, northern Nigeria, to some degree southern Chad, but it could very easily become a much wider movement because it has links to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which of course is linked to Al-Qaeda. And this means Al-Qaeda fighters could come down into northern Nigeria and exploit the current unrest. It already appears that they may have weapons from Libya, which of course came from Libya into northern Mali and then down into northern Nigeria. So we're beginning to see Al-Qaeda becoming involved in this movement in northern Nigeria. And that will make it very, very difficult and dangerous and very much in need of being addressed immediately by the African Union and by the region.
Mr. Okupe, I mean, do you have a firm understanding of this beast that you are tackling? There's a lot of debate about whether it has splintered, the fact that it now has links to Al-Qaeda, the different tactics that it's now using, the fact that it's starting to kidnap people. That's relatively new too.
Yes, empirical evidence will tend to suggest that there are foreign influence on the local insurgents, or terrorists. But I believe that our security agencies are not unaware of this, and part of their schedule is to actually retrain the army, to acquire capabilities with which they can deal with, with terrorism, especially. And this, many of our military forces, members of our military and security forces have already undergone proficient training in this line. Of course, we do know that there are possibilities of foreign complications. But I believe that our security forces, the Nigerian armed forces, are capable. They have the capability, they have the technology and the intelligence backbone.
I mean, do you
situation.
really have any chance of beating them? I mean, you've been tackling them since 2009 and you haven't got far. Is there any chance that you could win?
Well, the issue is that the government found it difficult to really take a firm decision on how to handle them initially. Because you see, the concentration in government is that these are some form of aggrieved Nigerians, and you cannot really go, the whole hog and battle them to finish. And this has been the concentration in government. But because of the escalation of the crisis, the increase in nefarious and very dangerous, heinous activities, and the rebellious action of hosting flags on the sovereignty of Nigeria, now made it.
Listen, Mr. Okupe, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in here. It's really bad, the sound coming from you, so forgive me. I hope we can fix it. And I'm going to throw a question to Ms. Freeman, and I'm going to bring in two things here: the amnesty that we've discussed, and also the underlying issues that create this problem. I mean, the government has a lot of money, the country has a lot of oil money, and yet it hasn't made its way down to many people, particularly in the north. Could this help alleviate the problem if the money was more freely distributed throughout the country? And could amnesty help in this?
Well, I mean, when we're talking about financial resources, it's not even a question of such a huge redistribution of wealth or changing the way that money is moving around the country. If we look at the situation since 2009, there haven't been any prosecutions or convictions for people accused of crimes related to Boko Haram. There's been hardly any. And when we look at the hundreds and hundreds of people who have been detained allegedly for involvement with Boko Haram, that's a huge failing by the criminal justice system of the country, a criminal justice system that actually could have the resources and the finances, as you've pointed out. They have money in Nigeria to address that. There's no witness protection system in Nigeria. So you have a situation where you have a population who are threatened on a daily basis by a group who has killed and who has publicly threatened to kill anyone who informs on them, and yet there's no witness protection system. So how can you expect to get information from a community or to get anybody to come and work with the police or the military? I mean, you can't even get close to the police or the military because they have barricades and machine guns and sandbags outside of the centres.
Okay, let me throw that to Ms. Huddleston. I mean, do you think any of this lack of action and the offensive that's happening at the moment, Ms. Huddleston, do you think that could drive more of a wedge between the Muslims and the Christians?
Now, that is, in fact, a huge, huge concern, because Nigeria essentially is three regions, the Igbos in the east, the Yorubas in the west, and then you have the northern area with the House of Fulani Muslims, which is the poorest area. And what Nigeria has failed to do, and they now have a southern president, a Christian president, Goodluck Jonathan, is they failed to win the hearts and minds of their population in the north. And is it too late? It might be too late, but they need to start now addressing the inequalities, the lack of justice, and the basic grievances of the people in the north, or this will continue to spread. I have little doubt that the Nigerian army, which is a formidable army, can probably put this down, but then it'll come back up again. So what has to be done, I think, is to look for some kind of ceasefire arranged by the United Nations, or let's get Great Britain involved, or the Union of West African States.
Okay, let's leave it there, Vicki Huddleston. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off.
get
we
the
have run out of
civilian
time. It's such a
population
big, fat
talking.
subject and
Sure.
just too big for this half an hour, I'm afraid. Thanks very much to our guests in Abuja, Doyin Okupe in Santa Fe, Vicki Huddleston, and in London, Lucy Freeman. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, please email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye for now.